on the future relationship between the UK and the EU. I'm joined here this afternoon with three colleagues from World Law Group member firms. I have Bernadine Adkins, who's the head of EU Trade and Competition at Gowling WLG, based in the UK. Bernadine's a graduate of the College of Europe in Bruges and spent many years living and working in Brussels. She's admitted in Belgium, I believe. She's a member of the advisory board of the Competition Law Forum at the British Chamber of International and Comparative Law. She's a member of the American Chamber of Commerce Competition Policy Committee, the Competition Law Association, and the Law Society Competition Section. She's been described as an innovative competition litigator. Rory Currain, who's here from Dublin. He's the head of construction, infrastructure and utilities at Mason Hayes and Curran in Ireland. He regularly advises on large infrastructure projects in Ireland, including on offshore wind and onshore wind farms, thermal power, waste to energy, data centers, technology plants, and real estate developments. Rory qualified in both Ireland and the UK, and he was appointed senior counsel by the Irish government earlier this year, the first time that this title has been awarded to solicitors. So congratulations, Rory. And finally, Jean-Luc Solier from France. He's the managing partner of Solier Advocates based in Lyon and Paris. And when he's not managing lawyers, which the lawyers among you will know is a bit like herding cats, he's advising on international M&A and corporate transactions in France and Europe. He has an LLM from the University of Michigan and spent some time working for a major US law firm before returning to France and developing the international business of his firm. He's also an ICC arbitrator. So we have a panel of experts all familiar with the difficulties of resolving conflicts. And that's been the story, I guess, of Brexit and the negotiations so far that I'm sure many of you have been following intently. When we originally booked this slot, we rather hoped we'd be reporting on the terms and details of a free trade agreement. Having looked at the timing, it seemed things needed to be agreed by the end of October in order to get through the ratification processes on both sides. We're still not there. The talks are still ongoing this week, and the clock is ticking. I think we have about 51 days until the transition period runs out as an automatic operation of law. And from the 1st of January, we have a new legal relationship between the UK as an ex-EU member and the remaining EU states. So perhaps I turn first of all to Bernadine and just ask, I'm sure the burning question in everyone's minds is, well, is there going to be a deal? Is it going to be this week, next week? What are the prospects?
Right, so I think if you were to ask me to put money on it, I would put money on a no deal, putting it crudely. And then I would say, well, there's a so what question about that, because actually it seems that we are going to get is very bare bones. Because I think the EU and the UK are coming at this from two very, very different places. So we started off, the EU signed the political declaration, and that was with the UK. That was really put out the framework of what the future relationship was going to be. Since then, we have seen the UK depart from that political declaration. And every day it seems to depart further. As quite frankly, the UK continues to debate with itself as to what it wants to be in the world post-Brexit. It still hasn't answered that question, which makes it very problematic in terms of what sort of a trade deal is it going to negotiate with the EU. I think Fintan O'Toole described it very well, saying that Brexit's a very strange kind of resurrection. The tomb is empty, but the vanished body has yet to be seen alive. And this is why we're still sitting here with a blank piece of paper. We still don't know where we're going, other than to say that this is going to be a very, very bare bones deal, if it is a deal at all, because we are going to have a hard border. It's going to be, if it does successful, it's going to be zero tariffs, zero quotas, but people importing into the UK or people exporting out of the UK are still going to have to fill in all those customs declaration forms and still go through the phytosanitary checks as well. So from a business perspective, either it's be it a no deal or a deal, it is still going to be problematic, and there's still a huge amount of adaptations for trade to make, and also because of the way Theresa May's red lines have worked, there is next to nothing on services in the deal, other than not having mutual recognition, other than possibly non-discrimination. So I would question actually whether we're actually going to see a deal. We are running out of time, and the areas of logjam they're all achievable technically. You know, the teams are there, the teams are in place. Technically, we could get to a deal. We could resolve the issues on level playing fields. We could resolve the issues on state aid. We could resolve the issues on governance, and also fish. Fish is a numbers game, quite frankly, in terms of where the quotas go. But to use an example of state aid, we thought we were getting somewhere on state aid, because David Frost, the UK head of negotiations, he recently went before a House of Lords Select Committee saying, yes, we're making progress, we're agreeing broad principles, we'll probably look at a dispute resolution. And now it seems the UK is rowing back from that, saying, actually, we want to be free to float as we see fit in terms of state aid. And that is evidently a total no-no for the EU. There isn't a single country contiguous to the EU which has concluded an arrangement. It's a sort of sad thing I do at night, is I've checked them all out. Every single one of them is a cut and paste of the EU state aid rules. And I thought the EU went a long way to accommodate the UK on that. But even with a massive great accommodation on the EU's part, it seems that the UK is rowing back from that. And for me, the biggest signal as are we looking at a no deal is what is happening with the internal market bill, part 5, where the UK has said we are going. They want to pass a bill that says essentially if the UK wants to walk away from the withdrawal agreement on state aid and also in terms of trade between Northern Ireland and the UK, we're going to enable secondary legislation to be adopted so we can walk away from the withdrawal agreement. We're also going to put it outside the possibility of judicial review. We're going to set aside Article 6 of the Human Rights Treaty, and so be it. Last night, an historic defeat in the House of Lords on this bill, rejecting that walking away, and the government has just dug deeper and said, nope, we're going to put it back in. And it is a total no-no from the perspective of a US deal, and also a total no-no from the perspective of getting it for European parliaments, and also politically in the EU. So everybody thinks that our government is going to behave rationally, because rationally we need a deal, but I don't think we should be expecting rationalism from this particular government. So I think that I've said enough, and I think, open out to the rest of you as to what you make of that.
Yeah, perhaps I was going to pick up on this. Obviously, we'll talk about the future relationship and the deal, and whether there's a deal or no deal is an integral part of perhaps how that relationship works practically. But there, of course, a political background to this as well, and the question of fish. For those of us who've been following it, it's a small part of the UK economy in general. It's a small sort of GDP impact on both sides, but clearly seen as an important political issue, and perhaps nowhere more so than in France. So, Jean-Luc, we've been reading something about the attitude of the French fishermen, and Macron also, I think, last week said, well, yes, our fishermen are going to have to adapt. They're going to have to accept that things won't be the same. But there's clearly, pressure, political pressure in France to get the best deal available. How do you see that playing out?
For me, just one aspect of the difficulties what we encounter, and sometimes in the media you put forward issues which are not in fact the main issues of the big picture. So yes, there is a problem there, and in January of next year, then these waters, they will not be the common field for all the fishermen in the region. What will happen exactly, I don't know. But again, I think that if you solve this issue, you will not solve all the other issues. And the deal has to be global. So just one picky aspect of a much bigger difficulty in this negotiation. And particularly, as Bernardine was mentioning, the question of the level playing field is really the big issue, and the issue of the state aids is really a big issue. And even if it is bad for the fishermen, again, it's not, I think, something we can really concentrate on. We don't know what will happen in any case.
Yes, I mean, state aid, it always seems, we talked about fishing as being one issue that's received a lot of coverage and has a nationalistic perhaps element to it. State aid is a much more technical issue, as Bernardine was saying, and of course historically the UK has not been an economy which has really worried very much about state aid. Quite on the other hand, it's been a driver, as I understand it, of the state aid rules in the EU in order to limit the opportunities for European countries, which typically are more say favorably inclined towards offering state aid to industries, to row back on that. I mean, I think Germany, and I looked at the figures recently, is offering on average about 3 times as much state aid to its industry than the UK. But it's clearly become quite a sticking block. Another issue which has, I think, played into the question of whether there will be a deal or not has been the question of dispute resolution, which is your sphere, Rory, and how that might be set up. My experience of negotiating deals has been that a deal never fails because we can't agree on dispute resolution mechanisms. If there's a will to do the deal, then that's often it may be nevertheless a technically difficult discussion to have, but not something which would ever cause a deal to fail. What's your view on the opportunities available and the options available on that topic?
Sure, John. Exactly like that. As you say, normally if you're concluding a complex deal and you're getting towards the dispute resolution clauses, it can often be a cut and paste, and there's obviously numerous fairly standard approaches to resolving issues. A big spanner in the works has been created really by the UK withdrawal legislation, which Bernardine summed up at the opening of the session, and the fact that the British Parliament has decided that it can unilaterally alter the terms of the withdrawal treaty, which was concluded between Britain and the European Union approximately a year ago. That's a fairly unprecedented negotiating position, and also from an international law, Vienna Convention on the law of treaties and so on, a relatively unusual position for a state to adopt. But as Bernardine has summarised, it does give the UK the power to unilaterally change fundamental parts of the withdrawal treaty, and that creates a trust problem, obviously. And obviously, if a deal is now to be done, very close attention is being paid to the dispute mechanism. What the EU is looking for is a hair trigger remedy provision, whereby if there are breaches, that the EU can impose tariffs and sanctions in various areas on an immediate basis, pending dispute resolution. And that, from a commercial objective perspective, makes absolute sense, but it's obviously something pretty unpalatable for the British side. But it's a political problem. It does exist. The one point you could make about it is, again, to Bernardine's point, the scope of the proposed deal on trade issues is so narrow that you've got services entirely left out of the treaty. So it is going to be relatively narrow issues on tariffs on goods traded and so on. So it may end up getting done if the rest of the deal can be done.
Yeah, and I understand that the EU's already started or opened proceedings against the UK in relation to I think it's Chapter 5, isn't it, of the Internal Markets Bill, Bernardine? What are the prospects of that?
Yeah, the government is stonewalling, the UK government. They haven't even responded to the initial letter from the European Commission saying we believe we're in breach. So now it's for the European Commission to write back with a mise en demeure, basically saying you must now act. We're requiring you to act to resolve that situation. So the UK is behaving like a stroppy teenager, quite frankly. It's just digging in, fingers in the ears, saying la 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 and ignoring it. And everyone thinks that once the deal is done, they'll pull that off the table and the UK can say, oh, we had to put that there to bring the EU to the table. I still think we need to take the UK government at their word. This is on the statute books. They've put it forward. The EU at the moment are dismissing it as a diplomatic huge mistake on the part of the UK, but they're digging in. They're digging in. So the EU has started to commence proceeding against the UK, and the UK is simply not engaging on that issue.
Mm-hmm. But this brings us back, I think, doesn't it, to the situation in Ireland and exactly, say, the UK's justification for those provisions in the Internal Market Bill, to secure the integrity of the UK market against the EU, which takes it to the Irish Protocol, Rory. And what the implications are for particularly the Northern Ireland economy and the Irish economy going forward is Northern Ireland finds itself in German, we've got a Spaghetti, so it's kind of a split between its membership of the EU, sorry, its membership of the single market going forward, and the customs union, together with its continuing, obviously, member of the UK internal market. How do you see that playing out? I mean, the UK government's taking a hard position in relation to there being no checks in the Irish Sea between the UK and Northern Ireland. But if the Northern Ireland continues to be part of the EU, for example, it's part of the single market rather, sorry, for example, in relation to labelling of goods, the EU conformity mark will continue to apply in Northern Ireland, as I understand it, in priority to the new UK system which is being introduced. So what will the implications be in this tension in Northern Ireland?
I wish I could answer that. It's effectively like the perennial problem, really, and I guess for the benefit of people who may not have studied this core issue quite as closely as perhaps we have, you've got fundamentally Ireland is the only country with a land border, the Republic of Ireland, that is, with a land border with the UK across the island of Ireland between the north and south of Ireland. And a principle underpinning the relationship between Britain and Ireland outside of the EU norms is what's called the Good Friday Agreement. A principle of that agreement is effectively no border, no firm or hard border on the island of Ireland, and unchecked movement of people and goods and so on. And that's backed by the EU and the US as when the Brexit negotiations in the withdrawal treaty that was concluded last year, the British side conceded that there would be goods checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK in order to preserve effectively a no border situation on the island of Ireland. And that was the position concluded more or less in the withdrawal agreement. And then the matters which we've been discussing have effectively been rowing back on that. And Britain said, well, in fact, it's reserving the right to back out of sections of the withdrawal agreement and effectively to remove the checks that it had conceded that would happen between Northern Ireland and Britain. So you've got this problem between the Good Friday Agreement and the withdrawal treaty is consistent with it, but the British current negotiation position is that it won't actually hold with what it agreed to over a year ago. So it is all a bit of a mess. If you have a situation where Britain leaves the EU without a trade agreement, then there must be a hard border on the island of Ireland from a trade perspective, but politically then that's at odds with the Good Friday Agreement. And that's what brings in this angle of the United States and President Biden and all of these type of things.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll come back to that, I think, in a moment. I just want to sort of go back on the impact. We talked a little bit about the psychological impact of the UK government's insistence on these provisions in the Internal Market Bill, which seem to give them the right, or they've admitted, give them the right in specific and limited circumstances to derogate from their obligations under the withdrawal agreement. How does that impact on the reputation of the UK in business terms, Jean-Luc? Again, I picked up on a press report, I think coming out of France, suggesting that until the end of this year, when the transition period ends, I think the head of the French Central Bank was expecting around 150 billion euros to be transferred out of the City of London to France, to Paris, in preparation for the new arrangements next year.
Well, there is a lot of mistrust really now because this United Kingdom Internal Market Bill doesn't concern only Northern Ireland. And there were recent declarations by Barnier, the negotiator, who said, we don't want to create any problem with Northern Ireland. We are ready to accept almost anything if it has some sense, that is somewhere checks, controls have to take place. But then the other kind of side of the coin is that we must really be sure that this level playing field will not be a joke. And when the UK is changing its mind with this market deal, there is this issue of Northern Ireland, but there are all the other issues, and particularly this notion of level playing field. If they can change their mind on this subject, why not on other subjects? So total mistrust today, and so I don't know how they are really negotiating. And the problem is that for the future relations, not only you have to determine rules, but you have to determine how things will be controlled, how you will assure yourself on both sides that the words will be respected. And of course, when you have an event like that, when you have a country saying our own laws can be above international law, which is really something that cannot be accepted, well, you don't know how to deal with that. So a lot of mistrust today, really, in France, but not only in France, because it's not just a question of France. You have 27 countries, and since the Bratislava meeting, they are totally aligned. They have the same, in fact, the words, the same opinions, the same, and there is only one head, in fact, with Barnier negotiating for the 27 countries.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Bernardine, the UK government talks a political game naturally to the press and to the wider world, but perhaps sometimes when you dig down into some of the position papers that have even been adopted by the UK government, I think there was one recently about the worst case, or the reasonable worst case scenario, I think it was called. You might recognize it, which is fairly open and fairly objective about the possible or the anticipated impact on trade at the beginning of January, which is quite alarming reading when you look at the statistics that say between 30 to 50% of all trucks arriving at Dover to travel to, in this case, France, to the EU, are not going to have the right paperwork to be accepted on the French side. And in total, up to perhaps 70% of goods which are being shipped from the UK to the EU will not be compliant with the EU requirements on paperwork as of the 1st of January. How are UK businesses actually even preparing? I mean, clearly there's a gap in preparation, but what can be done to bridge that gap?
It is incredibly problematic. There are a number of problems. First of all, business doesn't quite fully know what the government is going to do. The government has issued this thing called the border operating model, explaining what it is going to do, but that is probably only half the picture. So by and large, it says, don't worry, we're not going to start requiring customs duties until, health certificates until April, and then duties until July. However, you've got to depose a whole load of paperwork to basically explain why you want exemption until those periods. So whatever you do, whatever way you turn, there's going to be an awful lot of paperwork for business. But also just in terms of the sheer physical logistics, because, so for example, with respect to lorries coming from Northern Ireland, because there aren't enough basic depots in Wales, apparently lorries are going to be diverted through to depose papers through to Birmingham, as opposed to if they're going to end up in Wales. So you have to go Holyhead, Birmingham, then back down to Wales. So there's all sorts of quirks happening on the ground because logistics, quite frankly, have not been put in place. We don't have enough adequate customs brokers. We don't have enough adequate officers. And also, quite frankly, we don't have enough place to park these lorries, as you probably heard, that various car parks are being put into Kent. And again, I don't know why Birmingham. Birmingham is the furthest away from the sea, but there's an awful lot happening in Birmingham as well. So there's massive great tracts of land being tarmacked in Kent, and they're currently waterlogged. So it is, frankly, I'd like to be optimistic and say somehow we'll be British and Dad's Army light will muddle through. But it is looking very bleak. And last week, the National Audit Office issued a report saying Britain simply is not ready just to handle the sheer logistics of this. And in that context, there is a massive, as you said, disparity between what the government says and what is happening on the ground. So, for example, with respect to Northern Ireland, Great Britain trade, it is saying it's going to have unfettered trade, but actually their own guidance is asking for a whole load of different sorts of paperwork, which is immensely complex. Something about the British, I don't know how we manage to do it. We make things so complicated. Just to give you one example, sanctions, in looking at, say, for example, a paragraph under the EU sanctions rules, simple paragraph, quite comprehensible. We've all been advising on it for years. I attended a government webinar recently on sanctions because we want to have a heavy sanctions system. Instead of 2 years jail for breach now, we want 10 years. And it's a look at what we're doing, how we're improving EU law. Look at the paragraph, this is what we've done. And we now see 2 lines on the slide, two long paragraphs cross-referencing to a whole load of other sections to make this previous simple paragraph clear, as they put it. I mean, you know, lawyers, we're going to become some form of priesthood, quite frankly, to explain this to our poor clients. But we are seeing this, I'm afraid. We can't stop ourselves. It's like we've blown the dust off some of these people who drafted statutes in the 1970s, and they're back again. And they're drafting all this really, really complex customs legislation, and business is trying to get its head around it. Sorry, but it is a nightmare.
Quite a challenge. But I mean, you mentioned obviously the implications for Ireland. I'm old enough to remember the UK joining then it was the European Common Market back in 1973, and I remember that Ireland joined at the same time. And the view was, well, Ireland didn't really have much choice back then. The Irish economy was so dependent on the UK economy, it kind of piggybacked along. It's noticeable that as the UK has left the European Union and now is about to leave the single market and the customs union, Ireland's not following suit. There's been a change clearly in Ireland's trading relationships, and the comparative weight of those, I guess, between the UK and the EU. But there's some serious implications, aren't there, for Irish trade with the EU going forward? I think Bernardine just mentioned one of them, which is the transit through, I think it's called the land bridge, often, or referred to the land bridge, of Irish goods through the UK by truck, which typically takes 20 hours, and with the potential for delays at the UK ports, could obviously take much longer. And the alternatives are sea routes, which can take 40 to 60 hours, as I understand it. But are you seeing, moves to address those issues, Rory?
Well, I guess it's difficult to do much about the say the delays to the land route, but yeah, look, there's been a lot of planning and investment going on around this issue. In fact, the Dublin port started to upgrade in 2016 after the Brexit referendum, and the significant work has been done there. Obviously, the optimum route into the northern European markets is through Dover and the British Channel ports into Netherlands and the northern French ports and so on, and to Belgium. That is potentially going to get seriously disrupted. What has happened is a significant amount of additional shipping capacity has been put on from Dublin into the European markets, bypassing Britain. It is going to take longer. I think the shortest alternative is about 36 hours into Zeebrugge, and the largest ro-ro ferry in the world has been procured for that. It's been referred to as the Brexit buster. It's an enormous ro-ro ferry. It has 8,000 meters of lanes on it. So effectively, that's an 8-kilometer tailback that's been taken off the roads. Interestingly, it only takes the trailers, doesn't take the cabins. So the logistics are being restructured. So you're actually getting rid of the drivers now, and the cargo is going to go from point to point and then be taken on from Zeebrugge. So it's still not optimal. When your opening point there, John, in relation to the trade and so on, it has changed dramatically. When we joined the EU with Britain, 55% of our trade in all respects was with Britain. Now I think it's about 9%. But the food market is dominated by British trade, and that is not going to change. So that is potentially a very serious impact around the relationship. So there are workarounds have been put in place and so on, but they're certainly suboptimal.
I mean, it's one of the things that I noticed very early on here in Germany was that of course, the UK government and UK government representatives were very keen to stress the opportunities of Brexit. Always difficult from a German point of view, really, to understand what those opportunities might be, and people are still searching for them. Business obviously wants to be optimistic and wants to look for the ways in which not only to preserve existing business, but to develop business in the future. And I was just wondering, Bernardine, whether you have any insights from a European point of view, leaving aside the bigger issue of the UK and its supposed place in the world, but for UK EU trading relationships, where might those opportunities be?
Goodness knows, I have looked and looked and looked, tried to find an upside to it. I think John Major, he gave a great speech last night. Of course, the mainstream media has not picked it up on it. And he's saying we can now look forward to a flimsy, bare bones deal or no deal at all. This is a wretched betrayal of what our electors were led to believe. Brexit is the worst foreign policy decision in my lifetime. So I tend to say to clients, when they say, oh, how can we get advantage? I say, no, this is a damage limitation exercise. And one of the sales points from the British Brexiteers have used vis-a-vis people saying, look, this is the good thing about Brexit. It's not vis-a-vis EU relations, but vis-a-vis, we can get these fantastic, with global Britain, fantastic trade deals elsewhere, especially the US. So US is 17% of our external trade, EU is 47%. So this has been the big thing. We're going to get a US deal. Everyone's panicking now because we can't get one because Joe Biden's in. We're walking away from the Good Friday Agreement. But actually, on the government's own figures, their own impact assessment, and it was nice of them to give us an impact assessment because they've never given us one for Brexit. It says over 15 years, and this was unbelievable, their own figure says over 15 years, we will either get an increase in GDP of between 0.166% or 0.07% over 15 years. I mean, and now, of course, the Brexiteers are saying, well, we didn't want one in the first place. We never want, we're not interested in a US agreement. So what is the benefit for Britain? And there's a book that I find quite alarming, written by a French journalist, Marc Roche, called Le Brexit va réussir. And it's an absolutely terrifying book. His premise is, look, the British, the proletariat, have always accepted a really, really low base of social support. Look at their NHS, it's only 9% GDP per annum, in contrast to the social benefits the French have. Britain is set to really crash their rules, to become this sort of tax haven, offshore tax haven for financial services. Who needs rules? Who needs a bottom line for consumer protection, social, who needs enough revenues in to look after the proletariat? Because the proletariat will accept anything. Look at what they already accept in contrast to the rest of the EU. He says the parameters are all set for Britain to become some form of offshore tax haven for financial services. And it is on this basis that Brexit will succeed. That is the only positive story I have seen. And to my mind, that so-called positive story is a horror show in terms of social cohesion within Britain. But other than that, I have to say I've scratched my head. The government is also clearly putting out its stall on tech. It's doing an awful lot trying to promote tech in the UK economy. We're doing a lot in the Competition and Markets Authority, creating a tech division. We clearly want to be groundbreaking and global in that respect. So maybe we'll get somewhere on that. I don't know. But yeah, sorry to be so negative. But believe me, I'm an optimist and I've looked and looked and tried and tried. It's pharma, that's where we have a natural advantage, but even there, pharmaceuticals, we've lost the benefit of the EMEA. So it's hard. But on the government, it would be, crushing us in terms of regulatory protections and become some form of offshore tax haven.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that in relation to tech, obviously, but I've also seen, reports suggesting that, hey, as in a number of sectors in the UK, there's a big shortage of skilled staff, and typically skilled staff would come from outside the UK, and a significant percentage of those would come from the EU, and that's about to get more difficult. So those sectors are facing those challenges on top of the trading restrictions that they're going to be encountering as a result of the new relationship.
Yes, yesterday we got the immigration bill through. That became an act, and again, the government is very misleading. So our Home Secretary Priti Patel did a Twitter saying, "This is great. At last, we could control immigration." It's like we always could control immigration, but we chose not to. And it says people will only be allowed in on merit. But in fact, if you look at the bill, all of this, the devil's in the detail. Actually, whether you can get in or not will be a question of trade. So immigration is going to be on the table with respect to trade. So that will form part of trade negotiations.
Okay, I don't want to spend too much, but haven't they also dropped the income requirements rather quietly during the COVID pandemic? They've reduced it by about a third, from 30,000 something to 20,000 something.
Yes, when they realised we'd have no nurses. Yeah.
Yeah, just sort of moving on to something which we've experienced here in Germany. I think locally, I'm based in, as you know, in Baden-Württemberg, so Stuttgart. And one thing I have seen is that the local Ministry of Economics has become very focused on the bilateral relationship with the UK, something which for a long time wasn't really of any particular interest because the UK was wound up in the general relationship with the EU. And it was felt that companies were in a position to pursue their interests, pretty much unsupported by initiatives which were directed at particular economies. And that's changed. There's a clear focus now, an initiative to promote and support cooperation between the UK and this part of Germany. And I know other parts of Germany have similar programs in place. So there are some conferences coming up in December, partly around the new relationship and the new trading requirements going into next year, but also around how to facilitate new trading relationships, how to put businesses in touch with one another, and how to support and promote German businesses in maintaining and developing their business in the UK. Are you seeing anything like that in France, Jean-Luc? Is that something which you've come across?
Well, there is one big legal issue here, is that you cannot negotiate free trade agreements between countries, one country and the UK. You have to negotiate that at the EU level. For example, the integration of the countries were such that the UK had to pass a great repeal bill, because if not overnight, when the Brexit took place in January 2020 of this year, a lot of laws and regulations would have disappeared overnight. So what the UK did is that they, in fact, put in their national laws all the UK laws that for some of them they don't like at all. But they had to do that, because if not, you have nothing. And then also the other consequence is that all the trade agreements entered into by the EU, the UK will not benefit from it anymore at the end of the transition period. And we speak about more than 50 free trade agreements. And also outside free trade agreements, 1,700 bilateral and multilateral agreements to which it is currently a party. And it will not be a party anymore again overnight, because it was a party of these agreements only because it was a member of the EU. So yes, there may be some trade arrangements or things like that, but nothing really significant and nothing that could be just bilateral. When the UK will leave completely, it has left already, but after the transition period, all the international agreements that the UK is part of through the EU will disappear, and the UK will become a third party. As such, will apply the World Trade Organization rule, the WTO, and in fact, when you apply that, you benefit only from the most favored nation clause, but it is misleading, because in fact, when you have the most favored nation clause, that means that you are not allowed to grant a differentiated treatment compared to other third countries who are members of the WTO. So what I mean is that the 27 members of the EU, they will not be able individually to cut free trade agreements or commercial deals with the UK without the other. So it is why it was so important. It is so important that a free trade agreement be negotiated and be in place before December 31. And as Bernardine said, we know now that it is probably not, probably not will be the case, which means that we are in chaos. We don't know what will happen the day after December 31st, 2020.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's clearly a challenge. I think certainly here that it's and perhaps that's why it's being done at the level of the local regional governments, these initiatives, and they're very limited and specific initiatives supporting, for example, startups in the tech sector locally is one focus that I know the regional government have identified. But we were talking earlier on about services and you know, the fact that whatever comes out of this negotiation, services are not going to be in any way within the terms of whatever agreement might be struck. And that affects service providers, not just financial services, which has had a lot of press, but consultants and, of course, our own profession too, as lawyers. And I remember from speaking to friends and contacts in the UK very early on after the Brexit vote, people started looking for Irish ancestry. And Bernardine, I picked up on an interview that you gave a little while back that you have an Irish mother, if that's correct.
Yeah.
And so in the fortunate position of being able, I guess, to get an Irish passport, and that was seen as a real lottery win in your ancestry if you could could identify that and preserve your own free movement rights through that mechanism. Because the other issue for English lawyers was how to maintain practice rights in the EU, and many English lawyers looked at getting admitted in Ireland, amongst others. I think, Bernardine, you have your own experience of, I think you admitted.
The Irish route doesn't work because you have to basically be practicing in Ireland in order to have an Irish certificate. So I'll let you in, I'll take your subs, I'll invite you to this party, but they won't give you a practicing certificate. So I, as you said, I was fortunate in that I've got an Irish passport. So I was always on the E-list in Belgium. So I was able to become a Belgian avocat and prêter serment and all that sort of thing. But for most people, it's incredibly problematic. So, for example, from my perspective, I continue to give EU privilege to any advice that I give a client vis-a-vis the European Commission, but other people are not going to be able to extend that. So I don't know how law firms are going to do that, where they just want to use UK lawyers. They're going to have to white label something, have perhaps co-signatories in order to benefit from privilege with the EU. So that's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. I mean, in an ideal world, over time, there should be some negotiation between the law society and the individual law societies. One would hope for some form of mutual recognition. In an ideal world, one would hope that could be achieved. But it is going to take some time.
Yeah, but in the meantime, we did see many lawyers, as you said, registering in Ireland from the UK.
So,
and perhaps even some either setting up or expanding their offices in Dublin. Have you seen that, Rory? Is that a concern?
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of activity, and to Bernardine's point, we've had sort of hundreds of EU competition lawyers. I think Freshfields registered over 100 lawyers in Ireland. The Law Society obviously took the application fee, but the rules have developed, and the problem is that the practicing certificate and the supervision. And lawyers with Irish practicing certificates in the UK are in a difficult situation because fundamentally that they're not they will get admitted to the Law Society, but getting the practicing certificate is a problem. So as Bernardine was saying, it's not really working in the way that's been intended. We have had a number of UK law firms entering the market in various guises. Some were entering in quite an invasive way, but have pulled back quite a bit. But a lot of them are in insurance defense and things like that. So we haven't necessarily seen sort of marquee UK names opening up practices here in order to attack the, say, core financial services offerings in the Dublin market or go after financial services work here.
Yeah, so I think a hurdle we're going to find as UK lawyers, if we have a no deal, is how are we going to be able to, quite frankly, travel to continental Europe to provide a service, to meet a client, have a client meeting, for example, because we have no automatic rights. Well, we have to be looking at, what's available, as Jean-Luc said, under the WTO provisions, until such time as we can come to some bilateral arrangement. So that's going to be from day one problematic.
On issues like that, it might be that bilateral agreements could take place. It is what we call the equivalent decisions. So they can be taken either at the level of the EU or in different countries. For example, concerning the recognition of professional qualifications, things like that. So why not? I think the EU will want to cope with that at a global level. So it's a little bit different of free trade agreements and free movement of goods, because we are speaking of services. And we know that there are already equivalence decisions that have been negotiated and maybe have already entered in place for certain financial services, not all of them, but certain financial services. So this is the way, aside the free trade agreement, where solutions may be found. But that means that you have to negotiate thousands of subjects, thousands of issues, and each time that you have something like that, equivalence decisions, you have also to put in place the control that will have to take place after that, to be sure that both parties respect their obligations under the equivalence decision. So it's a total mess, but there is room for negotiation.
It's an area which, we kind of forgotten how complicated it was before the EU got involved and made it simple, and the rules straightforward for us all. And we had to look at this in Germany. And the question, as you said, Bernardine, of the ability of UK lawyers to give advice in each EU jurisdiction now becomes a matter of local law, local bar rules and bar regulations. So it's different in every country, and possibly different between regions within countries. And technically, in Germany, English lawyers can't fly in, fly out to give advice, as you said, and it may be different in other EU jurisdictions. That's not something which is seen as necessarily in the interests of German clients or either, to be honest. It's not something that people really want to have. It's just that's what the rules were. They were then changed at an EU level, so no one had to worry about them any longer. And now we're about to sort of revert back to that, and something will need to be done. But there are many other things that need to be done at the moment. Government time is pressed on all fronts with response to COVID. So these things are fairly low down the list of priorities. So it's going to be, a challenging situation on so many levels. And I think we all fit, or we all understand, but aren't able, of course, to identify exactly where the pressure points are going to come. And that's going to be one of the challenges, I think, going into next year on many levels, is seeing where the pressure points appear. As these level playing field rules disappear.
Yeah, certainly in terms of client queries, I think the immediate pressure point's going to be around food and drink. Because I don't think, again, because we're so used to free trade, people haven't appreciated how extensive the phytosanitary rules are. So, cheese, is it cooked, is it uncooked? Do we have to have a vet look at it? There's a shortage of vets. And the amount of trade, especially between Ireland and Northern Ireland as well, things going back and forth, and the need for phytosanitary checks all the way. So I think that's going to be the most immediate problem, is getting food to people. And then services, because as you said, people are so used to complete freedoms. Their mindset is, I can do this, can't I? I just have to jump onto one of the mode 1, 2, 3, 4s. It's like, no, this is now really, really complicated, because as Jean-Luc said, this is now DAO services, tends to be on the whole regulated still by the individual member states. So it's now a very, very complex world, and the devil is in the detail.
Yeah, and reverting back to these old rules, takes us back also to a world before technology. We've become used to using technology to cross borders effortlessly. I think without any real understanding or regard for where the regulatory issues may lie on what we do.
Yeah, and of course the government is obviously trying to put these software systems in place. It takes months and months and months to write this software. It's still not been written. Then they've got to test it. So that's another obstacle we're also facing.
Yeah. I'm conscious of time. We're open, of course, for questions, and there is I think a chat function or question function available if anyone wants to come in and pose any questions either to the panel generally or to any individuals within the panel. We'll be happy to take questions in the last few minutes of the session. But just coming back to this question of where are the pressure points and where's the need for advice. I mean, what we've been asked quite a lot recently, and surprisingly late. I mean, I've been quite surprised at how many companies have started coming just in the last few weeks and saying, oh, we need a general discussion about what the implications are for our business in relation to this new relationship. What are the issues we need to be looking at? And for many companies, data transfer is quite a big issue. There's no equivalence decision yet been granted by the EU to the UK, and these things are seem to be politically tied up with the wider negotiation. And so transferring data, intra-group from German company to across the to the UK, is going to be problematic from the 1st of January, and steps need to be taken to make sure that that can continue unimpeded. I've got a question which has come in. The question is, how will the UK handle the commercial relations of Latin America countries that have free trade agreements with the EU?
Right, what they're trying to, I can't specifically talk to specific countries. What the UK is trying to do are rollover agreements, basically replicate what they currently had with the EU. And so really, apparently they had about 40 rollover agreements that they really wanted to see if they could roll over. 20 have been negotiated. The biggest one, most important one, has been Japan. Canada's the next one. They've got a list. And I have to say, if I'm thinking through the list that they've got their priorities, I have to say Latin America is not at the top of that list of priorities, but they will be working their way down and through that. And of course, Britain, we can't expect, even if we do, we say we do, an automatic flip over, because certain concessions were made by these countries because they were dealing with 600 million consumers and we're only 60 in the UK. So it would be interesting to see the extent to which we are able to flip over and roll over those agreements. But again, I'm afraid there has been a lot of disinformation, again, I'm afraid, by the Department of International Trade. So for example, great, oh, isn't this wonderful? We've got a rollover agreement with Lebanon. Then if you look at our trade figures, we have 0% of trade with Lebanon. So I think as I keep saying, the devil is in the detail. Don't look at what they say, look at actually the figures, the data, what is there in the law. So Latin America will be absolutely on the list for a rollover arrangement, and I dare say that they're looking at it.
Good, thank you. There's another question come in. Anyone here claim to know anything about IP, intellectual property? The question is, will the UK continue to be a member of the European Patent Convention?
As I speak now, yes, but there have been some really, really squarey moments where they said no. So far, it seems we are in, but hanging by, I would say hanging on, but please God, we stay in. But I think that's part of the problem is going to be one day some politician is going to wake up to the fact it's got something to the European Court of Justice and hysteria will break out. So for now, I understand the current position is we are going to be in, which is an extremely good thing for business. And please God, it stays that way.
Good.
And if I'm wrong on that, I will email people because I'm not an IP expert and I will get beaten up by my IP colleagues if I've got that wrong.
Okay, it seems we have no further questions coming in.
There's a question on the chat.
There is, yes, I just noticed. Thank you, Rory. Yeah, thank you. There's another question. Do the panel have any predictions on how investment and banking for individuals and companies will change from 1st January 2021?
One thing I can say, we're obviously completely out with the host home country control. We're just totally out of that system. And so if we, for example, if the UK bank wishes to establish a branch in the EU, it is going to have to start from scratch, as much as the Swiss used to have to do. We basically have to completely and utterly comply with the rules of that host country. So, as Jean-Luc said, we are completely out in the cold. We are the same as the Japanese, not so much now, but an American bank. We have to start from scratch if we wish to provide services in or establish ourselves.
And one thing I know that some of us who UK citizens who live in the EU have seen are UK banks withdrawing service offerings to customers who are resident in the EU. So people are having their bank accounts closed. It seems not all banks are doing that. Others, a number seem to be able to keep them or keep that offering going. And I know a number have actually said by the end of the year, those accounts will be closed.
Yeah, that was the subject of some political discussion. I think the government has put some pressure on the banks not to do that because politically it's not a good look. But I don't quite know where the current situation is on that.
No, and I guess that would be a particular issue for people in Ireland, Rory.
In terms of holding accounts in UK banks and so on.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean there's obviously there's a huge amount of traffic in that respect. There's a slightly different parallel situation going on between Ireland and Britain on some of the free movements, in that Ireland has from the establishment of the state in 1920, we have a free movement area of people with the UK. So there's a different underlying relationship that we are in effect reverting to. We have a common passport area, and I'm not sure how far that goes into related services and so on, but there are a lot of exceptions around the movement of Irish people into Britain and vice versa in tandem with the EU position.
Good.
I suspect there'll be a fudge.
It does seem on so many levels that certainly the beginning of the early part of next year, you mentioned customs and the transitional arrangements to July, Bernardine. I know that in some other areas in UK Reach, for example, it's going out through the whole calendar year, but there are going to be a number of areas where the UK is just going to, it seems to try and muddle through by pushing out the requirement to adopt and to comply with the new UK regime to give companies time to kind of adopt. But obviously coming in the other direction, things are going to change fairly dramatically. I guess, and less willingness or less ability on the side of the EU to find pragmatic solutions to some of the issues that people will be facing. Good. Well, there are no further questions. I'd like to, on behalf of all the people who've tuned in to watch us today, I'd like to thank my panelists. I'd like to thank each of you for coming along, giving your time, your very thoughtful insights, comments, and opinions on this topic. This is my last session as director for the EMEA. So I'd like to thank everyone for having given me the honor and the opportunity to serve the group. From the end of this session, the new EMEA director will take over. That's Gail Chauffard from CMS in Belgium. And I'm sure you'll join me in welcoming him. Looking forward to his first session, which will be in the spring next year. And of course, I think we all hope very much and look forward to seeing each other again in person. And let's hope that that will be in 2021, following the news yesterday that a German company led by two scientists of Turkish immigrant families have successfully so far trialed the COVID-19 drug in conjunction with Pfizer. Let's hope that continues to show success. And that will become more widely available next year. So thank you very much for joining me, and have a good day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.